The camera flash was a starburst in the dim light of the gallery, and for a split second, it was the only thing I could see. I blinked, the ghost of it still dancing on my retinas, and forced a smile that felt as brittle as dried paint. The low murmur of the city's art patrons, the clinking of champagne flutes, the faint, sophisticated scent of perfume and ambition. It was all the symphony I had dreamed of for years, and tonight, it was playing for us. For me. Chloe stood beside me, radiant in a silk dress the color of a midnight sky. She squeezed my hand, her fingers cool and steady against my own trembling ones. She whispered, her voice a low, excited thrum. I couldn't answer. A lump of pure, unadulterated joy was lodged in my throat. I just nodded, my gaze sweeping across the room. I saw Mr. Henderson, his face crinkled into 1,000 happy lines, holding up his glass from across the crowd. He was one of our first students, a retired postal worker who'd told me he hadn't touched a paintbrush since his wife passed. Now, one of his vibrant, hopeful watercolors was hanging on the gallery wall behind me. I saw the faces of the teenagers from the after-school program, awkward and proud in their borrowed finery. I saw the culmination of 5 years of my life. 5 years of late nights, grant-writing headaches, dumpster diving for materials, and pouring every ounce of my soul into a crazy, beautiful idea. Our idea, the Hearthfire Arts Collective, a free, accessible art space for everyone in our little city of Grayling. Ms. Davies, the polished, impeccably dressed representative from the Atherton Foundation, stepped to the microphone. The room fell silent. Her smile was bright and corporate. We at the Atherton Foundation are proud to announce our largest community arts grant to date, she began, her voice crisp and clear. A collective gasp rippled through the room, followed by a wave of applause. I felt lightheaded, my hand flying to my mouth. $1 million. It was a number so vast, so mythological, it didn't seem real. It was enough to secure our studio space for a decade, to hire more instructors, to buy real canvases instead of salvaged wood, to finally breathe. Chloe squeezed my hand again, harder this time. And we are honored, Ms. Davies continued, gesturing toward my best friend, to be partnering with the visionary founder and CEO of Hearthfire Arts, Ms. The applause swelled again, a roaring in my ears. I turned to hug Chloe, tears finally breaking free and streaming down my cheeks. But she didn't turn to me. She was already stepping forward, moving toward the microphone, a practiced, humble smile gracing her lips. My arms fell back to my sides, a strange, cold prickle tracing its way up my spine. Singular? A young assistant began handing out sleek, embossed press folders. One was pressed into my hands. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, my heart suddenly hammering a frantic, discordant rhythm against my ribs. I pulled out the main press release, the heavy cardstock cool against my skin. My eyes scanned the text, searching for my name. The Atherton Foundation today announced a landmark partnership with Hearthfire Arts, the innovative community program founded in 2018 by Chloe Daniels. The words swam before my eyes. Founder, Chloe Daniels. Ms. Daniels, who built the collective from the ground up. My breath hitched. I read it again, and then a third time. A frantic, desperate search for a typo, a mistake, an omission. But my name wasn't there. It wasn't in the bio, not in the program description, not in the list of key personnel. It was as if I had been scrubbed from existence. as if the last 5 years of my life, the very dream that had been born in my heart, had never included me at all. I looked up at Chloe, who was now speaking gracefully at the podium, telling a story, my story, about finding Mr. Henderson's wife's old paint set in a box and convincing him to try again. The story I had told her in confidence, my voice thick with emotion, over cheap wine in our dusty, half-finished studio 2 years ago. And as she told it, she never once looked my way. In that blinding starburst moment of our greatest triumph, I realized I was completely, terrifyingly invisible. Chloe and I had been inseparable since we were 10 years old, a bond forged over scraped knees, shared secrets, and a mutual understanding that the world was a far less scary place when you had someone to face it with. She was the pragmatist. I was the dreamer. She made spreadsheets. I made messes with charcoal and clay. She saw the path. I saw the constellations. We were two halves of a whole, and for 20 years, I never had a reason to doubt it. The idea for Hearthfire was born on a rainy Tuesday in my cramped apartment, which smelled perpetually of turpentine and linseed oil. I was working a miserable graphic design job, creating soulless corporate logos, and my own art was languishing in the corner, gathering dust. I was complaining to Chloe, lamenting the lack of any real, accessible community art space in Grayling. The only gallery was stuffy and exclusive, and the city's community center had cut its arts budget to nothing. People need a place to just make things, I'd said, gesturing wildly with a half-eaten sandwich. A place where it doesn't matter if you're good. Chloe, ever the planner, had stopped scrolling on her laptop. She looked at me, a familiar spark in her eyes, the one she got when she saw a problem she could solve. "So, let's build one," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And so we did. We found a derelict warehouse space on the forgotten side of town, with a landlord willing to give us a deal on rent, in exchange for fixing the place up. We spent weekends hauling debris, patching drywall, and painting the cavernous room a warm, welcoming white. My savings went into buying second-hand easels and tables. Chloe's went into filing the legal paperwork. "I'll handle the boring stuff," she'd said, tapping away at her keyboard while I sketched out logo ideas on a napkin. "LLCs, tax IDs, bank accounts. You just focus on the art, Ilara." I had been flooded with relief and gratitude. The bureaucratic side of things felt like a foreign language to me. It gave me anxiety just thinking about it. To have Chloe navigate that world for me, for us, felt like the greatest gift. I trusted her implicitly. When she asked for my social security number for some form or another, I gave it without a second thought. When she said she was registering our business name, Hearthfire Arts Collective, I just smiled and went back to planning our first free watercolor workshop. Our partnership was a given, a fact as solid and real as the concrete floor beneath our feet. It was our dream, our work, our future. The first year was a struggle. We pooled our money to keep the lights on. I taught every class myself, from kids' pottery to adult life drawing, often to just 1 or 2 students. Chloe spent her evenings after her paralegal job writing grant proposals, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop in our tiny, shared office. She was relentless, meticulous. She'd interview me for hours, pulling stories from me about the students, about my motivations, about the transformative power of art. She said the grant committees needed the human element, the narrative, so I gave it to her. I poured out my heart, sharing the most vulnerable parts of my own story, the intimate details of our students' lives, trusting her to weave them into compelling proposals. And slowly, it started to work. A small grant from the local women's club, a $500 check from a Rotary auction. Each small victory felt monumental. The community began to notice. Mr. Henderson became our unofficial ambassador, telling everyone he knew about the place that had brought color back into his life. The teenagers started bringing their friends. The studio, once echoing and empty, was now filled with a constant, happy buzz of creation. It was alive. It had a heartbeat, and I was its heart. I knew every student by name. I knew their story, their fears, their small triumphs. I was the one who stayed late with a high school senior who was building her portfolio for art school. I was the one who held an elderly woman's hand as she cried, having just painted her first canvas since a stroke had weakened her dominant side. Chloe handled the spreadsheets, the bank account, the official correspondence. I handled the people. It was a perfect division of labor. It was our synergy. The Atherton Foundation grant was the holy grail. Chloe had been working on the application for nearly a year. She'd often stay at the studio until 2 a.m, fueled by coffee and a terrifying level of determination. "This is it, Alara," she'd said to me just a week before the gala. I had hugged her, my heart swelling with love and admiration for my friend, my partner. "We're changing everything, Chloe," I'd corrected her gently. She had pulled back, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Yeah," she'd said. The drive home from the gala was a blur. I don't remember leaving the gallery. Don't remember the polite, confused goodbyes I must have mumbled. All I remember is the slick, cold feel of the press folder on the passenger seat beside me, a venomous snake coiled in the dark. My mind was a chaotic storm of denial and confusion. It was a mistake, a massive, humiliating clerical error. Ms. Davies had misspoken. The press release was a misprint. Tomorrow, Chloe would call me, horrified and apologetic, and we would laugh about the sheer absurdity of it. We had to. Any other explanation was simply unthinkable. I parked in front of my small apartment building, the one I could barely afford, and sat in the silence of my car, the engine ticking as it cooled. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Chloe's name, my best friend, my partner. I called her. It went straight to voicemail. "Chloe Daniels is unavailable." Her voice was professional, clipped. It wasn't her usual warm, sing-song greeting. I tried again. Voicemail. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. I stumbled out of the car and up the stairs to my apartment. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of old paint and shattered dreams. I walked over to the cheap bookshelf where I kept a small, framed photo of Chloe and me. We were 16, our arms thrown around each other, faces smeared with ice cream, beaming with the invincible certainty of lifelong friendship. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the outline of her smiling face. The person in that photo, the girl who had held my hand through every crisis, real and imagined, for 2 decades. Who was she? And who was the woman who had stood on that stage tonight and erased me from my own life? I spent the night on the floor, curled up on the threadbare rug, the press folder lying open beside me. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flash of the camera. heard the roar of the applause for a name that wasn't mine. I scrolled through years of text messages between us, a digital archaeology of our friendship. Me, I'm so broke I ate ramen for breakfast. Chloe, never. I'll spot you. Chloe, the city permit is a nightmare. I've been on hold for an hour. Me, because Mrs. Gable just sold her first painting at the farmer's market, and she cried when she told me. Chloe, okay, yeah. The evidence of our partnership was everywhere. It was in every shared joke, every late-night panic, every mutual celebration. How could she deny it? How could she believe this was hers alone? The question echoed in the silent apartment. A painful, unanswered cry. Sometime before dawn, huddled in the cold, gray light, the shock finally began to recede, replaced by a raw, searing anger. This wasn't a mistake. This was a theft, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The next morning, I drove to the studio. My studio. My key slid into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it, my frustration mounting. It was stuck. Then I looked closer, and my blood ran cold. The lock was new, a shiny brass deadbolt that wasn't there 2 days ago. She'd locked me out. I pounded on the heavy metal door, my fist striking the peeling paint. Chloe, open this door. The silence from within was absolute. I pounded again, harder, my voice cracking with a mixture of rage and despair. This is my place too, Chloe. Finally, I heard the telltale click of the new deadbolt being drawn. The door opened a few inches, and Chloe's face appeared in the gap. She wasn't wearing her silk gala dress anymore. She was in her usual power outfit, a sharp blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked tired, but her expression was hard, impenetrable. Alara, you're making a scene, she said, her voice low and flat. I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You stole my life's work. You erased me in front of the entire city, and you're worried about me making a scene. I can't do that, she said, her body blocking the entrance. This is a place of business now. The corporate jargon was like a slap in the face. There is no we anymore, is there? According to you and the Atherton Foundation, there never was. She sighed, a long, weary sound, as if I were a difficult child. I did what had to be done to secure our future. The Atherton grant required a clear, single-point leadership structure, a sole founder. My voice rose, trembling. We built this place with our bare hands, with my savings, with my stories. You're an artist, Alara, she said, and the words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they dripped with condescension. You're brilliant. You're the soul of this place, but you don't understand business. The grants, the legal filings, the payroll, the insurance, that was all me. I built the structure that allows your art to happen. The justification was so twisted, so profoundly selfish. It left me speechless. She had taken my greatest vulnerability, my lack of business acumen, the very thing I had trusted her to handle, and turned it into a weapon against me. She had reframed my role as a secondary, almost trivial component. I wasn't the co-founder. I was just the talent, replaceable. So the $1 million, I whispered, the reality of it finally sinking in, solid and monstrous. It's all going to you? It's going to Hearthfire, she corrected, her eyes cold. I am Hearthfire. But don't worry, I'm not going to leave you with nothing. I've drawn up a contract, a salaried position. You can be our head art instructor. A generous offer, to be an employee in the house I had built, to take a paycheck from the woman who had stolen my dream. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I felt a sudden, strange calm descend over me. The screaming, pleading part of my brain went silent, replaced by a chilling clarity. "No," I said, my voice steady. "Don't be stupid, Ilara," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "This is the best deal you're going to get. There's no paper trail that says you own any part of this." Her admission hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. She hadn't just stumbled into this. She had planned it, meticulously. For how long? Months? A year? Had she been plotting my erasure even as I cried on her shoulder about a difficult student, or celebrated a small victory with her? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from my lungs. I looked at her, at the stranger standing in the doorway of my studio, and I didn't see my oldest friend. I saw a thief. "You might have the paperwork, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "but you don't have the story." I turned and walked away without looking back, the sound of the new deadbolt clicking shut behind me, echoing like a gunshot. The first 48 hours were a descent into a gray, featureless hell. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I just sat in my silent apartment, replaying Chloe's words, her cold, dismissive tone. There's no paper trail. She was right. I had been so trusting, so focused on the art and the community, that I had never once asked to see the incorporation documents or the bank statements. Why would I? It was Chloe. I would have trusted her with my life. It turned out, I had. My phone buzzed incessantly. Texts and calls from friends, family, even distant acquaintances, all congratulating me on the big news. Hearthfire got the Atherton grant. Each message was another twist of the knife. I couldn't bring myself to answer, to explain the humiliating, unbelievable truth. So I just turned my phone off. The world I had built was gone. My studio, my students, my purpose. It had all been contained within those four walls, and now I was locked out, a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. On the second night, I hit rock bottom. I sat on my dusty floor, surrounded by my own neglected canvases, and I cried. I cried for my stolen dream, for my lost friendship, for the naive girl who had so blindly trusted the person she loved most in the world. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me, and for a few dark hours, I let it win. I let it convince me that Chloe was right. I was just a hobbyist, an emotional, impractical artist who had no place in the real world. And then, in the deepest pit of my despair, a small, insistent buzzing started. It wasn't my phone, which was still off. It was the landline, a relic I kept for emergencies, its ringer a shrill, jarring sound in the oppressive silence. I ignored it, but it was persistent. Finally, annoyed, I dragged myself off the floor and answered it. "Ilara, honey, is that you?" The voice was warm, familiar, laced with a gentle concern that broke through my wall of misery. It was Mr. Henderson. I'm fine, Mr. H," I lied, my voice thick and raspy from crying. "You don't sound fine," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've been calling your cell. A few of us have. We were just wondering when the next open studio session is. My grandson wants to come." He chuckled, a dry, papery sound. His simple, innocent question was like a bucket of ice water to the face. The next class, the students, they were still out there, waiting. They didn't know that their haven had been conquered, their teacher exiled. In that moment, something inside me shifted. A tiny, flickering ember of defiance began to glow in the darkness. Chloe had stolen the building, the bank account, the business name. But she hadn't stolen the community. She hadn't stolen the relationships. That was something I had built with my own 2 hands, with my own heart, and it didn't belong to her. "There's been a change of plans, Mr. H," I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. "Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning? And can you ask a few of the other regulars to come too?" The next morning, I walked into the Daily Grind, a cozy local coffee shop, and saw them huddled around a large table in the back. Mr. Henderson, of course. Sarah, a young single mother who came to our pottery nights as her only form of self-care. And 2 of the teenagers, Marcus and Leah, who had practically lived at the studio for the past year. They looked at me with worried faces. Sarah asked, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. We saw the article in the paper. It was all about Chloe. I took a deep breath, and I told them everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just laid out the facts, my voice low and steady. I told them about our shared dream, about the legal paperwork, about the gala, about the new lock on the door. With every word, I saw their expressions shift from confusion to shock, and then to a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Mr. Henderson was the first to speak, his old eyes blazing with a fierce loyalty that warmed me to my core. "That's not just a betrayal, Ilara," he said, his voice trembling with indignation. "That's a theft." "She told your story about his wife's paint set in the article," Marcus added, his face dark with anger. Leah nodded, her lip quivering. "She can't do that. Hearthfire is you. You're the one who taught me how to see light and shadow." Their validation was the antidote to Chloe's poison. It was proof that my contribution wasn't imaginary. It was real. It lived in them. "She told me there's no paper trail," I said, looking at their determined faces. "And maybe she's right about the legal documents." I went home that afternoon with a purpose. Chloe had erased my name, so I would have to rewrite it myself. I started a methodical, painstaking process of unerasing myself. I dug through my cluttered apartment, transforming it into a war room. I unearthed every email I had ever sent with a lesson plan attached. I printed out text message conversations where Chloe and I discussed paint orders and student progress. I found the original napkin from that rainy Tuesday, the one with my first clumsy sketch of the Hearthfire logo on it, and carefully placed it in a folder. I scanned old photographs. Me on a ladder painting the studio walls, my hair flecked with white. Me sitting on the floor surrounded by laughing children during a finger painting session. Me and Mr. Henderson, side by side, holding up his first finished watercolor. In every photo, I was there. In every photo, the joy and the work were evident. Chloe was there too, sometimes, but she was often on the periphery, on her laptop, an observer to the messy, beautiful chaos I was conducting. Next, I reached out to more people, dozens of them, former students, parents of the kids in my programs, even the guy from the hardware store who gave us a discount on our first buckets of paint. I didn't ask them to fight for me. I just asked them to write down their memories of Hearthfire, to write down what the place, and my teaching, had meant to them. The responses started pouring in, emails and handwritten letters, each one a small, powerful testament to the truth. They were filled with personal anecdotes, with gratitude, with stories of discovery and healing. They weren't legal documents, but they were something far more potent. They were the soul of Hearthfire. As I compiled my evidence, a thick binder overflowing with photos, emails, and heartfelt letters, I realized Chloe had made a critical miscalculation. She believed the power was in the LLC filing and the bank account. She had secured the skeleton of the organization, but she had willingly, arrogantly, let go of its heart. And a body cannot survive without a heart. My final step was the hardest. It meant going public, turning our private heartbreak into a public story. I looked up the byline on the newspaper article that had praised Chloe so effusively. Maria Sanchez. I found her email address and wrote her a short, simple message. My name is Alara Vance. I am the other co-founder of Hearthfire Arts. The story you wrote is missing some crucial information. I have proof. I hit send before I could lose my nerve, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. The battle had begun. Maria Sanchez agreed to meet me 2 days later. I chose the same coffee shop where I'd met with the students, my new, unofficial headquarters. I arrived early, my binder of evidence sitting on the table in front of me like a shield. It was heavy, tangible proof of my existence. When Maria walked in, she looked exactly like her author photo. Sharp, intelligent, with a no-nonsense air about her. She exuded a professional skepticism that I found both terrifying and reassuring. She wasn't going to be swayed by tears or emotional appeals. She was going to want facts, and facts I finally had. Alara Vance, she said, extending a hand as she sat down. Her handshake was firm. Thank you for meeting me, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I know you're busy, but the story of Hearthfire, the real story, is important. For the next hour, I walked her through it all. I didn't just tell her my side, I showed her. I opened the binder and laid it all out on the table between us. I showed her the emails from 5 years ago, with timestamps, discussing the name and mission of the collective with Chloe. I showed her the photos of me doing the physical labor of building the studio. I showed her the early class rosters, written in my own handwriting. Then, I showed her the letters from the students. I let her read Mr. Henderson's powerful, eloquent words about how Hearthfire, how E, had saved him from a lonely, gray existence. I let her read Sarah's letter about how pottery night was the 1 hour a week she felt like herself, not just a tired, overworked mom. I let her read the impassioned pleas from Marcus and Leah, who considered the studio their second home. But the piece of evidence that made Maria's professional mask finally slip was something I had almost forgotten. It was a copy of the very first grant proposal Chloe had ever written for a tiny $500 grant from the City Arts Council. And in it, Chloe had used my own personal story as the emotional hook. She'd written, in flowery, compelling prose, about my grandmother, a painter who had lost her sight late in life, and how her unfulfilled dream had inspired my mission to make art accessible to everyone, regardless of their circumstances. It was a deeply personal story I had shared with Chloe in confidence. Maria read the passage, then looked up at me. Her eyes narrowed. The article I wrote, she said slowly. The one about Chloe. She told me this exact story, verbatim. I just nodded, a cold, grim satisfaction settling over me. She has the paperwork, I said quietly. But I have the truth. Maria closed the binder. The skepticism was gone, replaced by the focused, intense look of a journalist who has just found the real story. "I need to make some calls," she said, her voice all business. "I need to contact the Atherton Foundation for a comment." "I understand," I said. "This could get messy, Ilara," she warned. "It's already messy," I replied. The next few days were agonizing. I knew Maria was doing her due diligence, and I knew Chloe would be fighting back with everything she had. I could only imagine the slick, corporate-speak response she and her lawyers were crafting. I tried to keep busy, meeting with my small group of loyal students in the park, sketching with charcoal on cheap newsprint. It was a pale imitation of our studio, but being with them, creating with them, reminded me what I was fighting for. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Chloe. Her voice was ice. "A reporter from the Grayling Gazette called me," she said, her voice tight with fury. "Maria Sanchez. She said you've been feeding her a pack of lies, showing her forged documents, trying to sabotage me." "I'm telling the truth," I said calmly. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do. I didn't forge anything, Chloe. Those were our emails, our photos, our memories." "You are going to regret this," she hissed. "You're an emotional, unstable artist, playing games you don't understand. I have the best lawyer in the city." The threat was meant to scare me, to make me back down. But all I felt was a profound, weary sadness. The woman on the other end of the line was a stranger to me. My best friend, the girl who ate ice cream with me on a park bench, was well and truly gone. "You've already done your worst, Chloe," I said, and hung up the phone. The article was published online the following Friday. It was the front page story. Maria had done an incredible job. The article was meticulously researched and balanced, but the weight of the evidence I had provided was undeniable. She quoted from my emails. She described the photographs. She included powerful, anonymous quotes from students who feared reprisal. She printed excerpts from their letters. And, most damningly, she included the story of my grandmother, followed by a simple, devastating line. When asked about the discrepancy, Chloe Daniels' legal representative provided a statement saying Ms. It was a weak, transparent piece of legal jargon that did nothing to hide the lie. The article then detailed Chloe's sole ownership of the LLC and the bank accounts, laying out the legal reality alongside the emotional and historical one. It didn't call her a monster. It didn't have to. It simply presented the two stories, the one written in legal ink and the one written in love, sweat, and community, and let the reader decide which one was true. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Chloe. The comments section of the article exploded with outrage. Local social media was a firestorm of support for me. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to say they believed me, that they remembered seeing me at the studio, that they knew I was the heart of Hearthfire. But the biggest blow came that afternoon. The Atherton Foundation, a massive corporation pathologically allergic to bad press, released a statement. In light of the recent serious allegations regarding the leadership and founding of Hearthfire Arts, the Atherton Foundation is officially pausing all funding and partnership activities, pending a full and thorough internal review. The $1 million dream, the one Chloe had sacrificed our friendship for, had vanished into thin air. She had secured the bag, but she had fumbled it before she could even get it home. The weeks that followed were a strange, surreal limbo. Chloe had gone to ground. The vibrant, living community we had built was homeless. Chloe was left with a legally sound but worthless shell of a company, a $1 million grant that was now just a press release, and a reputation that was in tatters. One evening, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find her standing there. She looked awful. The power blazer was gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater. Her hair was down, and there were dark circles under her eyes. For a fleeting second, she looked like the old Chloe, the girl I had known my whole life. She asked, her voice small. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to slam the door in her face. But I stepped aside. She walked into my tiny living room, a space that suddenly felt charged with 20 years of shared history. She didn't sit down. She just stood in the middle of the room, wringing her hands. "They're pulling the grant, Alara," she whispered. "The foundation. They're exercising a morality clause in the contract. It's over." "It was gone the moment you decided to write me out of our story," I said, my voice devoid of pity. I panicked," she said, tears finally welling in her eyes. "They wanted a single founder, a strong leader. I've been working on that grant for a year, Ilara. It was everything. I convinced myself that I was protecting the project, that I was the only one who could manage that kind of money, that kind of pressure. I told myself it was for the best. The excuses were pathetic, self-serving. I had imagined this moment, this confrontation, 1,000 times. I had imagined screaming at her, crying, demanding an apology that could never be enough. But looking at her now, a diminished, defeated figure, all I felt was a vast, empty space where our friendship used to be. I asked, the question genuine. She finally looked at me, her face streaked with tears. "I thought it would be," she choked out. "I thought when we had the money, the security, that it would all make sense. I could give you a salary, you could just make art, and everything would be fine. But I lost everything. The community hates me. The students won't even speak to me." She had finally understood. She had won the battle for the business, but in doing so, had lost the entire war. "I can fix this," she said, a desperate edge to her voice. "We can issue a joint statement. I can tell the foundation it was all a misunderstanding. I'll amend the paperwork, make you a 50% partner. We can get the grant back, Alara." And there it was, not an apology for the betrayal, but a business proposal, a desperate attempt to salvage her own ambition. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that there was nothing left to save. "No, Chloe," I said, and the word was calm and final. "You can't fix this, and we will never be a we again. You wanted Hearthfire? You can have it. You can have the empty building and the worthless LLC and the memory of the $1 million you almost had," she cried, her voice raw with disbelief. "No," I said, walking to the door and holding it open. She stared at me for a long moment, her expression crumbling as she finally understood the finality of it. Then, wordlessly, she walked out of my apartment and out of my life. As I closed the door, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I just felt quiet. The quiet of a storm that has finally passed. The justice wasn't in her ruin. It was in my release. Rebuilding was brutal. I had no money, no space, no supplies. But what I had, I realized, was everything that mattered. I had the people. Mr. Henderson helped me secure a room in the basement of his church twice a week. It was damp and smelled of old hymnals, but the light from the high, narrow windows was surprisingly good. Sarah organized a supply drive on a local parents' forum, and donations started trickling in. Half-used tubes of acrylic paint, old canvases, boxes of kids' crayons, mismatched bags of clay. Marcus and Leah rallied their friends, who showed up on a Saturday to help us clean and set up the church basement, transforming the drab space with their energy and laughter. We called ourselves the Phoenix Arts Workshop, a new name for a new beginning. Our first session was small, just 10 of us huddled around a folding table. But as I looked at their faces, at the joy they took in the simple act of creation, I felt a sense of purpose so profound, it almost brought me to my knees. This was it. This was the real thing. It wasn't about the $1 million grants or the fancy galas. It was about the connection, the community, the quiet, revolutionary act of making something beautiful in a world that often felt ugly. Word spread. More people started coming. A local hardware store owner, having read the article, dropped off a huge box of mist-tinted paints for free. The coffee shop where I had held my war councils started a Be a Coffee, donate $1 to Phoenix Arts Jar on their counter. The city, perhaps embarrassed by the Atherton debacle, offered us a small, modest grant to buy a used pottery wheel. It was a slow, painstaking process, built not on a massive corporate sponsorship, but on 100 small acts of kindness. It was harder, and it was messier, and it was 1,000 times more meaningful. About a year later, I was standing in our new, permanent home. It wasn't the giant warehouse. It was a small, rented storefront with big, sun-drenched windows. It was modest, but it was ours, paid for by our own fundraising efforts, and a membership model where those who could afford to pay a little subsidized those who couldn't. The walls were covered in the vibrant, eclectic work of our members. Mr. Henderson was in the corner, patiently teaching his grandson how to mix the perfect shade of blue for a sky. Sarah was at the pottery wheel, her face serene and focused. Leah, who had just been accepted to a prestigious art college with a full scholarship, was mentoring a new group of teenagers. The room was filled with the familiar, beloved scent of paint and clay and coffee, and the sound of quiet creation and easy laughter. I picked up a brush, dipped it in a brilliant cadmium red, and made the first mark on a fresh white canvas. I didn't know what it would become yet, but for the first time in a long time, the not knowing wasn't scary. It was freeing. Chloe had cashed in on my dream. Yes, she had taken the shiny, marketable version of it and tried to run. But she had left the real thing behind. She had left me with the messy, imperfect, beautiful, beating heart of it all. And as I looked around the sunlit room at the community we had built, not from $1 million, but from the ashes of a painful betrayal, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was the one who had ended up with all the riches. I had my story back, and this time, I was the only one who would ever get to tell it.